We live in an era of constant noise. Social media bombards us with opinions, notifications interrupt our flow of thought every minute, and modern culture celebrates busyness as a sign of productivity. Amid this chaos, there exists an ancient wisdom that has withstood wars, fallen empires, and civilizational crises: Stoicism. But here is the secret that few people know. The most powerful habits for strengthening the mind are not the loudest ones. They are not grand public declarations, dramatic manifestos, or spectacular transformations. They are silent habits, those you practice in the quietness of your mind, in the space between stimulus and response, in the choices no one sees, but that shape who you truly are. This script is a deep journey through the 12 silent habits practiced by the great Stoics. From Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor who governed the greatest empire in the world while facing wars, plagues, and betrayals, to Epictetus, the slave who became one of history's greatest philosophy teachers, passing through Seneca, the imperial advisor who wrote about death and freedom with rare lucidity. These men were not perfect. They did not preach perfection. They preached daily practice, constant effort, and silent discipline, and that is exactly what we are going to talk about today. Before we begin, I need you to understand something fundamental. Mental strength is not the absence of emotion. It is not being cold, distant, or insensitive. Mental strength is the capacity to feel deeply and still act with wisdom. It is the ability to look at chaos and find the quiet center within yourself. It is what the Stoics called the hegemonikon, the governing principle of the mind. Each of the 12 habits we will explore is a practical tool with deep philosophical roots and immediate applications in your daily life. It does not matter whether you are a student, an executive, an artist, or a parent. These habits work for anyone willing to practice them. Let us begin this journey. The philosophy behind strength. What is Stoicism really? Before we dive into the 12 habits, we need to establish a solid foundation. Stoicism is not a philosophy of emotional repression, as many people mistakenly believe. Understanding this will completely change how you absorb everything that follows. The origins. From Athens to Rome. Stoicism was born in Athens around 300 BC, founded by Zeno of Citium. According to history, Zeno was a Phoenician merchant who, after a shipwreck that destroyed his fortune, ended up in Athens and began frequenting a bookshop. There he discovered the writings of Socrates and became so fascinated that he asked the bookseller where he could find men like Socrates. The bookseller pointed to Crates, a cynic philosopher passing by on the street at that very moment, and so began Zeno's philosophical journey. Zeno began teaching at the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch of Athens, which gave the philosophy its name. His followers were called Stoics, those of the porch. The philosophy he developed focused on how to live well, how to be virtuous, and how to find tranquility in an unpredictable world. The school flourished and spread throughout the Mediterranean world, but it was in Rome that Stoicism found its apex. 3 major figures define Roman Stoicism and are our primary sources: Epictetus, 50–135 AD, Seneca, 4 BC 65 AD, and Marcus Aurelius, 121–180 AD. A slave, a wealthy senator, and an emperor, demonstrating that Stoic philosophy transcends social position and external circumstances. The 4 fundamental principles. Stoicism rests on 4 cardinal principles, known as the 4 Stoic virtues: wisdom, Sophia, prudentia, the capacity to discern what is good, bad, and indifferent. It is the knowledge of how to act correctly in every situation. For the Stoics, wisdom is not accumulated information. It is correct judgment applied to real life. Courage, Andrea fortitudo, not only physical courage, but moral courage, the disposition to do what is right even when it is difficult, to face the truth even when it is painful, to remain faithful to your values even under social pressure. Temperance, sophrosine, temperantia, self-discipline, moderation, control of one's own impulses and desires. Not the elimination of desires, but the ability to not be governed by them. Justice, dikaiosini cha iustitia, the social virtue, how we relate to others, how we fulfill our duties, how we contribute to the common good. For the Stoics, we are social beings, and virtue must express itself in our relationships. The dichotomy of control, the heart of Stoicism. If you needed to reduce Stoicism to a single concept, it would be the dichotomy of control, which Epictetus describes in the very first line of the Enchiridion. Some things are in our control and others not. This simple distinction is revolutionary. What is in our control? Our judgments, impulses, desires, aversions, in short, our own actions and internal perspectives. What is not in our control? Our body, reputation, property, positions, and in a word, everything that is not our own action. When you spend your life trying to control what you cannot control, other people's opinions, other people's behavior, external events, the weather, the economy, you create a permanent state of anxiety and frustration. But when you focus your energy on what you truly control, how you think, what you choose, how you respond, you find an inner freedom that no external circumstance can take from you. This is the foundation upon which all 12 habits are built. Keep this in mind as we move forward. Habit 1. The practice of negative visualization. Imagining the worst to appreciate the best. Contemplate the possibility of everything you love being taken from you, then appreciate what you have right now. So Epictetus, what it is and why it works. Imagine waking up tomorrow and everything you love has disappeared. Your health, your family, your home, your job, your freedom. Does that sound morbid? The Stoics would disagree. For them, this practice, known as premeditatio malorum or negative visualization, is one of the most powerful tools for cultivating gratitude, resilience, and deep appreciation for life. The central idea is simple. By mentally visualizing the loss of what we value, we break the process of hedonic adaptation, that human tendency to grow accustomed to life's blessings and stop appreciating them. When you imagine your life without someone you love, you come back to truly appreciating them. When you imagine losing your health, you begin caring for it with greater attention. Marcus Aurelius practiced this regularly. In his Meditations, he writes about the impermanence of everything: friends, family, power, health. Not to become pessimistic, but to live fully conscious of what he has while he still has it. The neuroscience behind the practice. Modern psychological studies corroborate what the Stoics knew intuitively. Tim Wilson and Daniel Gilbert, psychology researchers at Harvard and the University of Virginia, discovered that counterfactual thinking, imagining how things could have been worse, significantly increases satisfaction with positive events in our lives. The human brain has a natural tendency toward what psychologists call automatic negativity. Our attention is naturally drawn to what could go wrong. The premeditatio malorum, paradoxically, uses this tendency in our favor. By consciously visualizing negative scenarios in a controlled mental space, you neutralize the power of unconscious fear and cultivate genuine appreciation. How to practice in real life. Begin with a 5-minute practice each morning. Sit comfortably, breathe deeply a few times, and then bring to mind something you value deeply. It could be your health, an important relationship, your ability to work, your freedom. Now gently imagine what your life would be like without it. Feel the weight of that imagined loss. And then, open your eyes to the present and acknowledge that you still have it. Feel gratitude bubble up naturally. Do not force the emotion. Simply observe what arises. Over time, you will notice that this practice fundamentally changes how you experience daily life. Small things, a hot cup of coffee, a conversation with a friend, the simple act of breathing without pain, begin to carry a value that was previously invisible. A powerful variation. At the end of each day, mentally list 3 things that could have gone worse. Not to cultivate pessimism, but to train the mind to recognize what is already going right. This simple exercise has been associated with significantly higher levels of life satisfaction in positive psychology research. The trap to avoid negative visualization is different from rumination. Rumination is when you get stuck in negative thoughts in a passive and anxious way. The premeditatio malorum is active, purposeful, and has a clear objective: to cultivate resilience and appreciation. If you notice that the practice is generating anxiety instead of gratitude, reduce its intensity. Start with smaller losses before addressing the bigger ones. Habit 2. Silence as discipline. The art of not saying everything you think. Most of the time, keep silence or speak only what is necessary and in few words. Epictetus, Enchiridion, the power of what is left unsaid. We live in a culture that celebrates expression. Say what you think, show who you are, share everything. And while authenticity is a real virtue, the Stoics identified a subtle danger in this compulsion to verbalize every thought. You lose control of your own internal narrative. Epictetus devoted a significant portion of his teachings to the discipline of speech. He observed that talking too much, especially about others, about external events, about unsolicited opinions, drains mental energy, creates unnecessary conflicts, and paradoxically weakens your influence. People who speak less are frequently perceived as more confident, wiser, and more powerful. But the Stoic habit goes beyond the simple economy of words. It is about cultivating a space between thought and expression, a space where you can observe your impulses before acting on them. That space is where wisdom lives. Marcus Aurelius and the triple filter. Marcus Aurelius developed what we can call a triple filter before expressing any thought. Is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? If a statement passes none of these filters, it does not need to be said. This principle, which echoes Socrates' famous sieve, is a practical tool for everyday life. Think of the unnecessary conflicts that could have been avoided if more people applied this filter. How many workplace arguments? How many fights in relationships? How many social media posts that generated regret could have been avoided with a moment of pause and reflection? Silence as strength, not weakness. One of the greatest misconceptions about the discipline of silence is believing that it is passivity or weakness. It is the opposite. When you refuse to engage in gossip, to react impulsively to provocations, to defend your position in every trivial argument, you are exercising a form of strength that most people never develop. The world's most effective negotiators know that silence is their most powerful weapon. When you go silent after making a proposal, the psychological pressure falls on the other side. When you do not react to a provocation, you frustrate the provocateur and preserve your energy. When you choose not to participate in destructive conversations, you maintain your integrity. Practical exercises. Exercise 1. The day of silence. Once a month or even once a week, choose to spend a few hours in deliberate silence. No music, no podcasts, no unnecessary conversations. Observe the initial discomfort. Observe what arises in the quiet. Over time, silence ceases to be a void and becomes a fertile space for deeper thoughts. Exercise 2. The 5-second pause. Before responding to any message, email, or comment that triggers a strong emotional reaction, wait 5 seconds. Breathe. Ask yourself, does this response serve my values or only my wounded ego? This simple pause can prevent regrets that last years. Exercise 3. The speech audit. For 1 week, keep a small journal and observe what you talk about throughout the day. Classify your conversations: constructive, neutral, or destructive. How many were truly necessary? How many drained your energy without bringing any value? Habit 3. Living according to nature, aligning your actions with who you truly are. Happiness is simply this: a good mentality aligned with nature. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations. What living according to nature means. Living according to nature is one of the most fundamental precepts of Stoicism, and also one of the most misunderstood. It is not about dropping everything and going to live in a forest. For the Stoics, nature carries 2 interlinked meanings: the nature of the universe, logos, and the reason that permeates everything, and specific human nature, our unique capacity for reason and virtue. Living according to nature means essentially use your reason. Follow your unique capacity to discern good from evil, act with virtue, contribute to the well-being of your community, and accept the natural order of things, including death, change, and uncertainty, without irrational resistance. For modern people, this principle translates into something profoundly practical: living in alignment with your deepest values. Not with the values that society projects onto you, not with those your parents wanted for you, not with those that social media celebrates, but with those that, when you are completely alone and honest with yourself, you recognize as truly your own. The cost of misalignment. Most people experience a chronic form of silent suffering that comes from the misalignment between who they are and how they live. You work at a job that contradicts your values. You maintain relationships that drain your energy. You pursue goals that deep down you know are not truly yours, and this misalignment generates what the Greeks called akrasia, weakness of will, the inability to act in accordance with what you know to be best. The Stoics observed that much of human suffering comes not from external circumstances, but from this internal tension between what we know to be right and how we actually live. Seneca, who spent much of his life navigating the dangerous waters of Roman politics while trying to maintain his philosophical integrity, wrote with extraordinary honesty about this tension in his letters to Lucilius. Discovering your nature. How do you discover what your nature truly is? The Stoics suggested several practices. First, observation. Observe your visceral reactions. What fills you with energy? What empties you? What, when you do it, makes you feel that you are being fully yourself? Second, Socratic questioning. Question every should in your life. Do I want this goal because it genuinely resonates with my values, or because someone else defined it as valuable? Third, contemplation. Set aside regular time to simply be with your thoughts without external entertainment and observe what emerges naturally. A powerful exercise. Imagine yourself on your deathbed looking back at your life. What kind of life would you have needed to live to feel that it was a life well lived? Not the most successful by external standards, but the most authentic according to your deepest values. Habit 4. The discipline of perception. Seeing things as they are, not as fear paints them. The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. Marcus Aurelius. How your mind distorts reality. The human mind is a story-making machine. When an event happens, our mind immediately begins constructing a narrative around it, adding meaning, seeking patterns, projecting consequences. And very often, the story we create is far more dramatic, far more threatening, and far more permanent than reality. You are not promoted. The story your mind creates: I will never advance in my career. My boss hates me. Maybe I am simply not good enough. The bare reality: you were not promoted this time. That is the difference between an event and the interpretation of an event. The Stoics called this phantasia, the impression that events make on the mind, and their central practice was to distinguish between the phantasia and reality, refusing to add unnecessary judgments. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are distressed by something external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it, and this you have the power to revoke at any moment." The obstacle as the path. One of the most revolutionary insights of Stoicism, one that completely contradicts common thinking, is that obstacles do not block the path. They are the path. This idea has direct roots in Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. The principle works like this. Every obstacle you encounter carries within it an opportunity to practice a virtue. A conflict with a co-worker is an opportunity to practice wisdom and patience. An illness is an opportunity to practice acceptance and strengthen character. A financial loss is an opportunity to discover what truly matters to you. When you change your perception of the obstacle, you change your relationship with it. Stoic techniques of cognitive reappraisal. Modern cognitive psychology independently rediscovered what the Stoics knew 2,000 years ago. Our automatic thoughts often do not correspond to reality and can be actively transformed. Here are some specific Stoic techniques. Physici. See things in their most basic nature, stripped of emotion. If you call a piece of cloth a luxury dress, you are adding a layer of meaning. The cloth is just cloth. If you call an insult an attack on my honor, you are adding a layer. Words are just sounds. This practice is not cynicism, it is clarity. Decategorization. When you feel fear about a specific outcome, ask, in the larger scheme of my life, how important is this in 10 years and in 10,000 years? This temporal perspective does not minimize real suffering, but it puts into proportion what we often turn into catastrophe. Inversion. Instead of asking, how can I avoid this problem, they ask, what can I learn or gain by going through this challenge? This simple shift transforms the experience from passivity, something happening to you, to agency, you choosing how to respond. Habit 5. Amor fati. Loving your fate as it is, not as you wish it to be. Do not seek for things to happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life. To Epictetus, the most misunderstood concept in Stoicism, amor fati, literally love of fate, is perhaps the deepest and most frequently misunderstood Stoic concept. Many people confuse it with passive conformism or fatalistic resignation. Accept everything as it is and do not try to change anything. But that is a complete distortion of what the Stoics taught. Amor fati does not mean you do not act, do not change, do not fight for improvements. It means that while you act with all the vigor and competence you possess, you accept the outcome, whatever it may be, as the only thing that could have happened given all the circumstances. You give your best, and then you fully embrace what comes, without lamentation, without denial, without resentment. Nietzsche, who was profoundly influenced by Stoicism, wrote, "My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity." And he was not a conformist. He was someone who fought fiercely against his own illness, against the nihilism of his era, against intellectual limitations of every kind. The crucial difference: active acceptance versus passive resignation. Imagine a sailor in a storm. Passive resignation would be him letting go of the helm and saying, "Let God's will be done." Amor fati would be him fighting with all his skill and strength to navigate through the storm, and at the same time fully accepting that the outcome, safe arrival or shipwreck, is beyond his total control. He gives everything he has and then embraces what comes. This requires a clear distinction that returns to our foundation. What is in my control, my effort, my skill, my preparation, and what is not, the wind, the waves, unforeseen circumstances. Amor fati is giving 100% to what you control and unconditionally loving what comes from what you do not control. Practicing amor fati in daily life. This habit is transformed by a simple question you can ask yourself at any difficult moment. How can I love this moment, this exact moment, with all its difficulty, as a necessary part of my story? Not, how can I tolerate this? Not, how can I escape this? But how can I love this? It seems impossible when you are in the middle of real pain. But with practice, you begin to notice something extraordinary. The most difficult moments of your life were often the ones that most shaped your character, deepened your wisdom, and expanded your capacity for compassion. When you look back, you often find that you would not change those experiences, even the most painful ones, because they made you who you are. Amor fati is beginning to feel that not only in retrospect, but in the present. Habit 6. The practice of the present moment. Why the Stoics were the first mindfulness masters. Confine yourself to the present. Marcus Aurelius, Meditations 2,000 years before mindfulness. Long before Jon Kabat-Zinn developed the MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction program in the 1970s, before Thich Nhat Hanh popularized mindful meditation in the West, before mindfulness became a buzzword in meditation apps, Marcus Aurelius was writing in his private diary about the importance of living completely in the present moment. "You have power over your mind, not over outside events," he wrote. "Realize this and you will find strength." And elsewhere, lose yourself in the present moment. Remember that every person lives only in the present moment, this swift instant. Everything else has either been lived or is still unknown. For the Stoics, the present moment is not merely a wellness strategy. It is a matter of metaphysics. The past no longer exists except as memory. The future does not yet exist except as projection. The only real thing, the only thing you can actually work with is now, the cost of misallocated time. Seneca, in his work De Brevitate Vitae, on the shortness of life, makes an observation that resonates with extraordinary modern force. Life is not short, but we make it short. It is not scarce, but we are wasteful with it. Think about how many hours you spend ruminating on the past, on decisions you cannot undo, on conversations you should have handled differently, on missed opportunities. And how many hours you spend anxious about the future, about problems that may never materialize, about what-ifs that consume energy that could be used right now. The present, the only moment in which you can truly act, love, create and grow, frequently takes a back seat. The technique of the view from above. Marcus Aurelius practiced what we can call the view from above, the ability to see himself and the present moment from a broader perspective. Imagine your observer self rising above the immediate situation and seeing the bigger picture, not in a dissociative way, but from a perspective that places the present moment in context without diminishing its reality. When you are in the middle of a heated argument, this view from above might show you that in 10 years, you and that person might be laughing about it, or that the argument, however intense it seems now, is just a small point on a longer line of your life. This does not nullify the importance of the moment, but it frees you from being completely absorbed by it. Practical applications. Sensory anchoring. A powerful Stoic exercise for returning to the present moment is sensory anchoring. Deliberately bring your attention to what you are experiencing through your 5 senses at this exact moment. What do you see? What are you touching? What sounds reach your ears? What tastes or smells do you notice? This simple exercise, which can be done anywhere at any time, interrupts the cycle of rumination about the past or anxiety about the future, and brings you back to the only moment that is real, the present. Over time, this practice creates what psychologists call attentional flexibility, the ability to consciously direct your attention to where it is most useful. It is a profoundly Stoic, profoundly practical, and profoundly transformative skill. Habit 7. The habit of voluntary hardship. How the Stoics use deliberate discomfort to strengthen the mind. Practice yourself in little adversities and prepare your spirit for greater ones. As Seneca, Moral Letters. Comfort as the enemy of growth. There is a sophisticated trap that modernity has created. We have eliminated so many sources of difficulty thanks to technology, material comfort, and social protection systems that we have gradually weakened our capacity to deal with real adversity when it inevitably arrives. The Stoics identified this centuries before modernity and created a deliberate practice. The voluntary introduction of discomfort into routine, not as masochism, but as training. Just as an athlete does not wait for a real competition to start exercising, a Stoic practitioner does not wait for a real crisis to start developing resilience. Seneca practiced regular days of voluntary poverty, periods in which he lived with the absolute minimum, ate simple food, wore modest clothing, not because it was financially necessary, but to demonstrate to himself that if the worst happened, he could not only survive, but continue being himself. The practice of Cato Seneca describes Cato the Elder as a model of voluntary hardship. Cato walked barefoot on rainy days, wore minimal clothing on cold days, refused to use a litter when all others of his class did so. Not to impress anyone, but to continuously test himself. The purpose was twofold. First, to build real mental and physical resilience. Second, and perhaps more importantly, to demonstrate to himself that his well-being did not depend on comfortable external conditions. That he could be himself, thoughtful, virtuous, effective, regardless of circumstances. How to practice. Today. You do not need to sleep on the floor or walk barefoot in the snow. Here are modern forms of voluntary hardship that honor the Stoic spirit. Intermittent fasting. Not only for the health benefits, but as a discipline exercise. When you choose not to eat, even when you have access to food, you are training the capacity to say no to your impulses. Cold showers, one of the simplest and most effective practices. The body's immediate response to cold, the impulse to jump out of the shower, is a daily opportunity to practice overriding an immediate impulse. Technology-free periods. Choosing to spend a day without a smartphone or an afternoon without the internet is extremely uncomfortable for most modern people, which reveals exactly how much our capacity to be alone with our own minds has atrophied. Challenging physical exercise, not just for physical health, but as a laboratory for learning to move beyond discomfort, to not stop when the impulse is to stop. Difficult conversations. One of the most valuable forms of voluntary hardship is having the conversations you avoid. Giving honest feedback, resolving conflicts that have been left pending, expressing needs you normally suppress out of fear of the other person's reaction. Voluntary hardship does not have to be only physical. It can be profoundly interpersonal. The paradox of comfort. Here is something few people understand. The more you flee from discomfort, the more power discomfort has over you. Every time you avoid a difficult situation, you reinforce the signal to your brain that the situation is dangerous and should be avoided. Over time, the comfort zone becomes a prison that progressively shrinks. Voluntary hardship reverses this process. Every time you choose discomfort deliberately, take the cold shower, do the hard workout, have the difficult conversation, you reinforce a different signal. I can handle this. Discomfort does not destroy me. Over time, your capacity to face what life inevitably brings increases exponentially. Habit 8. The art of strategic indifference, what the Stoics called adiaphora. If you don't have the right to command, don't try. From Epictetus, not everything deserves your energy. One of the most liberating habits you can develop is the ability to identify what truly matters and concentrate all your energy on it, while treating everything else with strategic indifference. The Stoics called things that are neither virtue nor vice adiaphora, indifferent things. This does not mean these things do not exist or do not matter in practice. Health is preferable to illness. Wealth is preferable to poverty. Success is preferable to failure. But none of these things is essential to a good life. A good life, a virtuous life, can be lived under any of these conditions. When you internalize this, something radical happens. You stop treating every preference as an existential necessity. You stop acting as if your fundamental happiness depends on getting the promotion, on other people approving of you, on the weather being good on your day off. You begin to distinguish between wanting something and needing something to be happy. Liberation from external expectations. One of the greatest sources of mental suffering is what modern psychologists call external locus of control, the belief that your well-being depends on factors outside yourself. The approval of others, financial success, health, reputation. When these things go well, you feel good. When they go poorly, you suffer. The Stoics proposed a radical internal locus of control. Your fundamental well-being depends only on the quality of your character and your choices. This is not naivety. It is recognizing that external circumstances can be affected and altered, but your relationship with them is always a choice. When Marcus Aurelius lost multiple children, a devastating experience for any parent, he continued governing with wisdom, writing with depth, and living with integrity. Not because he did not suffer, but because his core identity was not anchored in his children's success or in the absence of loss. Application. The Stoic priority list. Try this exercise. Divide the concerns of your life into 3 categories. In the first column, list everything that is completely in your control. Your attitudes, your efforts, your choices. In the second column, list everything that is partially in your control. Outcomes of projects, health, in part, relationships, in part. In the third, list everything that is totally outside your control. The economy, other people's opinions, natural events, the past. Now, observe where the majority of your worries and mental energy are being spent. If they are concentrated in the third column, what is completely beyond your control, you have discovered the primary source of your unnecessary suffering. The Stoic practice is to gradually redirect that energy toward the first column. Indifference as presence, not distance. It is important to clarify a possible confusion. Stoic indifference is not emotional coldness or lack of care. You can, and should, care deeply about the people you love, your projects, the world around you. The difference is that you do not allow your inner stability to be hijacked by those cares. You can love someone deeply without your fundamental well-being depending on that person's behavior. You can work passionately on a project without your sense of worth depending on that project's success. This distinction between genuine care and emotional dependency is one of the most liberating things Stoicism offers. Habit 9. The Philosophical Journal, the practice of self-examination that transformed Marcus Aurelius. Begin each morning by asking yourself the most important questions. What must I do? What must I avoid? What must I practice? Epictetus, The Meditations, a personal diary that changed the world. The book we know as Meditations by Marcus Aurelius was not written to be published. It was the emperor's personal journal, intimate reflections he wrote for himself, often during military campaigns on the banks of the Danube, as a form of continuous self-education and self-examination. He never knew it would be read by millions of people over 2 millennia. This makes the Meditations unique in philosophical literature. It is not a treatise intended to impress, not an elaborate argument to convince others, not a presentation of ideas for posterity. It is a man being honest with himself, continually working to become better, and we are the accidental beneficiaries of that private practice. The structure of the philosophical journal. A Stoic philosophical journal is different from a common emotional diary. It is not just a place to record how you felt. It is a laboratory of self-knowledge and transformation. Here is a powerful structure based on Stoic practices. Morning, the day's briefing. Before starting the day, write for 5 to 10 minutes about the challenges you anticipate. What difficult situations might arise? What temptations might appear? What virtues will you need to practice? How do you want to behave? This practice prepares the mind for the day like a general studying the terrain before battle. Evening. The day's review. Before sleep, conduct an honest review of the day. Where did you act in alignment with your values? Where did you fall short? Not in a spirit of punishment or shame, but with the curiosity of a scientist studying data. What can you learn? What will you do differently tomorrow? Periodically. Deeper questions. When you have more time, use the journal to explore deeper questions. What do I truly value? Am I living according to those values? What needs to change in my life? What patterns of thought limit me? What kind of person do I want to be? The neuroscience of reflective writing. Modern science confirms the benefits of reflective writing with remarkable consistency. Research by Dr. James Pennebaker at the University of Texas demonstrated that writing about difficult experiences reduces psychological suffering, improves physical health, and increases cognitive clarity. The process of transforming experiences into words activates regions of the prefrontal cortex, the center of rational thought, and reduces activity in the amygdala, the center of fear and emotional reactivity. In other words, when you write about what happened to you, you literally move the experience from the emotional and reactive part of your brain to the reflective and rational part. This is, in neurological terms, exactly what the Stoics were doing intuitively. The questions Marcus Aurelius asked himself in the Meditations, we can identify the questions Marcus Aurelius used for self-examination. Some of the most powerful ones we can adapt today. Am I acting in accordance with my rational and social nature? The central question about alignment with values. Am I treating others with the justice and generosity they deserve as human beings? The question about social virtue. Am I unnecessarily resisting what is beyond my control? The question about acceptance. Am I living in the present moment or losing the now in worries about the past and future? The question about presence. What would Epictetus, Socrates, or another wise person do in my place? The technique of using an imaginary mentor to gain perspective. Habit 10. Memento mori, the contemplation of death as a tool for life. Think of this. Soon you will be no one, and nothing will be alive that is alive today anywhere. Marcus Aurelius. The most radical and most necessary practice of all the Stoic habits, the contemplation of death is probably the one that most frightens modern people, and paradoxically, the one that can most transform your life. We live in a culture that treats death as an absolute taboo, a medical problem to be solved, a reality to be denied until the very last moment. The Stoics had a radically different perspective. Memento mori, remember that you will die, is not a declaration of despair. It is a tool of awakening. It is the reminder that your life is finite and that therefore each day carries immeasurable weight and value. It is the antidote to existential procrastination, that habit of postponing important conversations, meaningful projects, and relationships that deserve attention to a tomorrow that may never come. How the Stoics used memento mori. Marcus Aurelius, who as emperor had a slave whose job was to whisper, "Remember that you are mortal," in his ears during triumphal parades, wrote extensively about death in his meditations. But his approach was not somber. It was lucid. Alexander the Great and his mule driver both died, and the same thing happened to both, he wrote. They were absorbed into the same life force of the universe, or dissolved alike into atoms. This equalization by death does not nullify the importance of how you live. On the contrary, it enhances it. If in the end we are all equal before death, then what truly matters is the quality of how you lived, not the external accumulations you leave behind. Seneca, who faced death threats multiple times during the reign of Nero, and who was finally ordered to commit suicide by the emperor himself, wrote about death with impressive serenity. "No man can have a good life if he does not learn to die well," he asserted, and that learning began with the regular contemplation of his own finitude. The deathbed perspective. A powerful Stoic practice is what we can call the deathbed perspective. Regularly imagine yourself at the end of your life looking back. From this perspective, many things that seem enormously important today reveal themselves as trivial. And many things we neglect, relationships, experiences, meaningful contributions, reveal themselves as what truly matters. Steve Jobs, in his famous Stanford commencement address in 2005, described his daily practice of looking in the mirror and asking, "If today were the last day of my life, would I want to do what I am about to do?" That question is not suicidal. It is orienting. It is memento mori in action. Freedom through acceptance. Paradoxically, the full acceptance of mortality, rather than generating fear or paralysis, frequently produces a profound sense of freedom. When you accept that you will die, you stop living in a state of continuous denial. You stop acting as if you had infinite time. You begin making choices more aligned with what truly matters. Researchers who study what they call terror management theory, the theory that much of human behavior is motivated by fear of death, have found that when people consciously confront their mortality in a reflective way, rather than merely with anxiety, they report greater clarity about their values, greater satisfaction with their relationships, and greater willingness to pursue meaningful goals. The weekly memento mori practice. Here is a concrete practice. Once a week, preferably in a moment of quiet, sit with this question for 10 minutes. If I knew I was going to die in 6 months, what would I do differently in my life? Do not answer impulsively. Let the question settle. Observe what emerges. Most of the time, the answers reveal something powerful. The changes you would need to make are possible right now, regardless of whether you die in 6 months or 60 years. You would not need a death sentence to call that person, to start that project, to say those words, to stop wasting time on things you know deep down do not matter. Memento mori is, above all, an urgent and gentle invitation to begin now. Habit 11. The virtue of duty toward others. Why real mental strength includes service. What is good for the hive is good for the bee. As Marcus Aurelius, Stoicism is not selfish. There is a common misconception that Stoicism is an individualistic and even selfish philosophy. Focus on yourself, control your mind, become indifferent to the rest. But the Stoics had a radically social and cosmopolitan vision that completely contradicts this interpretation. For the Stoics, human beings are fundamentally social. We are part of a community, of our family, our city, our nation, and ultimately, the universal human community. They called this oikiosis, a natural affection that expands from self-preservation to care for others, like concentric circles expanding outward from ourselves. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "I was made for them, as a hand was made for the other hand." Seneca stated, "Homo sum, humani nihil a me alienum puto." I am human, and nothing human is foreign to me. The Stoic concept of cosmopolitanism, the idea that all human beings are part of a single community, was revolutionary in its time and remains powerful today. Mental strength through service. There is a profound psychological dimension to serving others that the Stoics understood, and that modern science confirms. Focusing on the well-being of others is one of the most effective strategies for breaking the cycle of self-focused rumination that feeds anxiety and depression. When you are absorbed in your own problems, your perspective narrows. Everything seems urgent, everything seems immense. You get stuck in a loop of thoughts about your own difficulties. But when you direct your attention toward another person's well-being, something shifts. You gain perspective. Your problems, seen from the outside, often seem smaller, and you discover a source of meaning that transcends your personal circumstances. Duty as free choice. A crucial point. For the Stoics, service to others is not an external burden imposed upon you. It is an expression of your deepest nature. When you act with generosity, with compassion, with contribution to the common good, you are acting in alignment with what is fundamental in human nature. This generates a form of satisfaction that no individual achievement can produce. Harvard researcher Ellen Langer, in her work on aging and well-being, consistently found that people with a sense of purpose, especially those whose purpose is connected to the well-being of others, live longer, with better physical and mental health. Meaning, in other words, has literally biological value. Practice the circle of responsibility. Identify your concentric circles of responsibility. Yourself, your immediate family, your close friends, your local community, your professional field, your broader society. For each circle, ask, how can I genuinely contribute to the well-being of these people? Not in a way that sacrifices or neglects your own needs, but in a way that is complementary to self-care. A simple daily practice. At the end of each day, identify one thing you did that contributed to another person's well-being. It can be small. An encouraging email, genuine help to a colleague, real presence in a conversation. What you are cultivating is the habit of including others in your circle of attention and care. The connection between service and inner freedom. There is a beautiful paradox that the Stoics understood deeply. The more capable you are of living beyond yourself, of acting for the good of others, of contributing to something greater than your own immediate interests, the freer you become from the whims of the ego. The ego is a constant source of vulnerability. It needs to be approved, needs to win, needs to be special, needs to be right. When you transcend the ego in genuine service to others, you discover a far more stable and satisfying source of identity. Marcus Aurelius governed the greatest empire in the world for nearly 2 decades. And what did he write about power? Not as a means to satisfy his ego, but as an obligation, a service to be performed with excellence and integrity. The purpose of life is to serve and show compassion and the will to help others, he wrote. For one of the most powerful men who ever lived, power was a means of serving, not an end in itself. Habit. 12. The practice of philosophical gratitude, beyond thank you, the deep wonder. When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love. Marcus Aurelius, Stoic. Gratitude versus popular gratitude. Gratitude has become fashionable. Gratitude journals, thankfulness posts on social media, lists of things to be grateful for. And while there is genuine value in these practices, Stoic gratitude is something deeper and more demanding than a daily list of good things. Stoic gratitude, or what we can call philosophical wonder, is a way of seeing. It is the continuous recognition that existence itself is extraordinary, that each moment of consciousness is an improbable gift, that the complexity and beauty of human experience, even in its most painful forms, is something to be contemplated with awe. Marcus Aurelius, who had access to the greatest riches and powers of the known world, wrote with gratitude not about his palaces or his position, but about things like the way bread splits open as it bakes, the beauty of an aging lion, the foam on ocean waves. This attention to the ordinary as extraordinary is the heart of philosophical gratitude. The science of gratitude and the brain neuroscientist Rick Hanson, in his work on neuroplasticity and well-being, describes what he calls the brain's negativity bias, our evolutionary tendency to register negative experiences more intensely than positive ones. Bad events stick in memory more strongly. Positive experiences need to be deliberately savored to leave lasting impressions. The practice of gratitude, especially when performed with full attention and sufficient duration, he suggests absorbing each positive experience for at least 20 to 30 seconds, literally rewires the brain's neural connections toward a greater orientation to the positive. In Stoic terms, you are training your perception to find value in what is present instead of remaining fixed on what is absent. Wonder as the antidote to trivialization. One of the most subtle traps of modernity is trivialization, the feeling that everything has already been seen, everything has already been done. Nothing is truly surprising. The infinite availability of entertainment, information, and stimuli creates an increasingly numbed palate. Philosophical wonder is the antidote. It is the capacity to sit before a glass of water and genuinely marvel at the fact that you can feel thirst, that water exists in the world, that your body knows how to use it, that you have hands to hold it. This is not naivety. It is the recognition that existence is the most fundamental miracle of all. Physicists tell us that the probability of any one of us existing, given the specific sequence of events required from the Big Bang to the birth of each of us, is astronomically small. Every living human being is, in a sense, an improbable occurrence of cosmic proportions. When you begin to feel this, not merely know it intellectually but feel it, gratitude becomes not a practice but a natural state of being. Integrating gratitude and memento mori. Stoic philosophical gratitude connects deeply with the memento mori we discussed earlier. It is precisely because you know you will die, that this moment is finite, that this moment has value. Impermanence is not a tragedy, it is the foundation of preciousness. When you combine the contemplation of death with the practice of gratitude, you create a powerful mental state, full presence with deep appreciation. You are here now, completely, knowing that this moment will never be repeated, and finding in it something to be grateful for. The Japanese have a concept that captures this with beauty. Mono no aware, the pathos of things, the beauty that emerges from impermanence. Cherry blossoms are so beautiful in part because they last so briefly. Sunsets are precious in part because we know the sun will rise again, but this specific sunset, seen from this specific place, through these specific eyes, will never be repeated. That is Stoic philosophical gratitude, not a list of positive items, but a way of seeing that finds depth and value in every moment, precisely by recognizing that every moment is unique and irrecoverable.